Good morning to everyone joining today's session. Let me please welcome you on behalf of BONARD to our fourth webinar of our 2022 City Market webinar series. Just before we get started, I would like to mention that the presentation and the recording will be automatically distributed after the session and once it is available. So let me welcome you all and thank you for your time. Thank you as well for being able to join. So my name is David Navarro. I am a business development manager at BONARD, and it will be my pleasure to discuss the student housing market for Lisbon and to show you all of our data and our findings based on BONARD's research. So just to give you a brief description of how the session will run today is we will commence with a market briefing and the presentation, which will be focused on key data and trends from the Lisbon market. Such topics will include the demand as well as the current and future supply of the student housing within this market. Afterwards, we will have a look at some of the key players of the student housing market, and as well, we will finish with an overview of some of financial indicators related to the market performance. And these will include rent levels and some costs. And finishing the presentation, we shall have the panel session. It is our great pleasure to welcome key market leaders who will help us to better understand the market dynamics and as well to engage in a fruitful discussion so that you will be able to have a better overview and understanding of the behavior of the Lisbon market as well as the Portuguese one. So for those of you unfamiliar with the BONARD, we're a market intelligence and strategic development firm. We're specialized in the rented residential asset classes. Company was founded in 2007, and we have had more than 10 years of experience within student housing. And over the recent years, we have as well covered other rented residential sectors, such as built to rent, senior living, and co-living. BONARD is headquartered in Vienna. We have another 2 offices in European cities, and we have a branch in China. In terms of our team and what we have done over the past couple of years is we are now 56 specialists, and we have done over 500 projects such as location assessments, consultancies, deliveries, and analysis. In terms of our geographical coverage, we cover now more than 200 markets on a municipality level across Europe, Asia, Australia, Latin America, and Canada. And our main goal is to be able to support our clients and to be able to help them as well so that they can leverage our knowledge and our experience as well as our data to support them through all their investment processes to a third party and unbiased data and research. So without further ado, let's dive into the presentation and explore as well as understand in further depth the Lisbon market. So I would just like to once again kindly welcome you all to our 4th session of BONARD's webinar series dedicated to our knowledge for the most sought after student housing markets in Europe. The data and the insights that we will be sharing and presented to you are based on BONARD's in-house data and our in-field research, as well as conversations with the local players. We have already covered Milan, Madrid, and Warsaw, and now we will talk about Lisbon. So we hope that the following presentation and data will help you have a better understanding of the Lisbon market dynamics, and this will serve as a base for the subsequent panel. So let me dive into the first slide. So when we're talking about demand and looking at the demand point of view, referring to student population in Lisbon, we see that it continues to increase over the years for both international and domestic students. There are approximately 128,000 students in Lisbon, of which a little over 21,000 are international, which makes approximately 16% of the total, whilst the rest are domestic, and around 24% of these domestic students are domestic mobile or students who come from outside the Greater Lisbon area to study. In terms of universities, Lisbon is home to 28 of them. The top countries of origin for international students come from mainly Brazil, Angola, Guinea-Bissau, and Italy. So we can hence conclude that with the increase in demand from international students, Erasmus, and others, this indeed provides a higher target audience for PBSA operators. Now, in this next slide, when we're talking about supply within this market, there is evidently from our research, and as you can see, an undersupply or a lack of student beds in Lisbon. There are currently around 127 student residences within the city, of which provide almost 5,000 beds cumulatively. And the largest portion of the student housing accommodations is the private one. So out of these 127 assets, 94 of these are private and the rest are public. And in terms of beds or capacity, we can see that 2,687 of these beds belong to the private sector, whilst the rest 2,271 of them belong to the non-private one. So as we can see, the private sector consists of 54% of the total bed capacity, and as the largest provider of an operator within Lisbon is Livença Living, and they provide approximately 930 students with beds, which represents roughly around 35% of the current private stock. So on the map, you can see as well a distribution of the private PBSAs versus the non-private ones within the city. So in this next slide, which is focusing on the PBSA market structure in terms of supply, it is important to highlight that the Lisbon PBSA and overall the Portuguese market is not so developed. It's undersupplied. So we can see it is an immature market where indeed private stock versus non-private stock is still quite small. So the majority of the private assets, 91% of them, have less than 50 beds, whilst the public is a little bit more distributed in accommodations with less than 50 beds or between 50 to 100 beds. So when talking about an average bed capacity, the private has an average of 29 beds compared to an average of 73 beds provided by the public stock. Now, let's talk a little bit more about the future PBSA stock within Lisbon by the year 2025 and 2026. So it is expected that over 3,700 beds will be introduced into the market, of which around 65% are planned to be added by private investors over the next couple of years. So some of the names are Odalis, Zior Uhub, Smart Studios, and Become by Urbania. And Nido recently opened a 380 bed capacity asset this year in September. Now, if we would compare the pipeline for private stock, which has more than 2,400 beds, the public, on the other hand, will only provide around 819 beds, and these will be provided by the University of Lisbon. So, as we can see, the majority of the pipeline belongs to the private PBSAs, and apart from this list, BONARD tracks as well much more projects within pipeline. So the market we can consider is far from achieving saturation point. Over the next couple of years, it's estimated that by 2025, giving a large room for growth and expansion for private investment and development, the saturation or provision rate will reach only 5.5% by 2025. An interesting fact that I would like to mention is that even though provision rate is low, the occupancy rate for Portugal overall is around 94%, which is considerably quite high, and it is indicative, once again, of the high demand for this product. So this data we have been able to collect by being in touch with operators, with individual residences. We've had as well conversations with PBSA owners. We've conducted as well mystery shopping, and we have as well done visits to the individual assets so that we can find out the current occupancies, as well as a further breakdown of tenants, right, and the preferences towards certain room types, or what it is that makes them more interested in the PBSA assets within the city. Now, if we would talk about rents based on our collection of data for various room offerings, we can see overall in this, there is a big gap between rents charged in the private versus public accommodations. And the biggest one is specifically for single ensuite, with an average of 566 euros versus 361 euros. And within single studios, the average is around 716 euros for private versus 569 euros for non-private assets. So the most consistent and similar average that we've observed on monthly rents charged are in the double rooms, with 256 euros on average for the private versus 246 euros average for monthly rent in public establishments. So as we can see as well in the graph, the single rooms do not have such a wide average rent gap between private and public, with approximately an 80 euros difference. So if we would hence benchmark the private rental market on a monthly average, rents for single studios, we can see that for 25 square meters, the price is of around 903 euros. So as we benchmark or we compare assets, we can see a clear correlation between the monthly rents that are being charged with the facilities that are being offered, as well as the capacity related to these assets. So with more facilities we see that are available within the assets, the more room there is for charging higher rents for the operators. So even though we're seeing that some of the small assets with less than 100 beds, still the number of facilities can be quite high in these small assets. So as more players begin entering the market and there is more competition, the emphasis will be placed on providing a wider variety of facilities and amenities to attract students and hence to increase both occupancy and rents. So for the Lisbon market, large-scale private establishments mainly feature communal kitchens, study rooms, social areas, gyms, and other types of facilities as well. Now, this next slide will give us a benchmark of the main cities in Portugal. We thought would be a good comparison point when it comes to student population. We see that private beds as well, provision rate, and some of the key indicators that we've considered. So based on the data that we are displaying, we can see that Lisbon indeed has the highest number of students compared to Porto, to Coimbra, and to Braga. Now, whilst Porto is in fact the market with the highest PBSA beds and share of private beds, it is, however, the one with the highest provision rate, with around 8.4%. Now, Lisbon, on the contrary, is the city with the lowest provision rate of PBSA, with only 3.9%. And as well, it has the highest percentage of international students. So this makes the Lisbon market a very interesting one for future developments and for PBSA. So as we've previously covered in the presentation, Lisbon constitutes a growing market. It has an increasing demand from international students and an undersupply of PBSA establishments and the lowest provision rate out of the previously covered markets that we've seen, so Milan, Madrid, and Warsaw. And we would hope that you found value in the data and our research presented today. So let us now jump to our awaited panel discussion with our key market leaders, so we can engage in a fruitful discussion concerning the Lisbon market. So if I could just kindly ask our panelists to turn on their cameras. And perfect. So first of all, we would like to kindly thank you for joining our panel discussion. So I would as well ask if you gentlemen could briefly introduce yourselves so that our attendees can know a little bit more about yourselves, as well as the firms that you represent and what are your main areas of focus and similar. So perhaps
David.
Sorry,
we're talking over each other. Shall I go first, Ricardo?
Please, Brian. Thank you.
That's great. My name is Brian. I'm from Roundhill Capital. Roundhill is a vertically integrated investor, asset manager, development manager, and property manager of residential real estate, mainly focused across Europe with some interest in the United States. We, in the student space, we have over 10,000 beds. We are active in most European countries with a particular focus at the moment in the UK, Ireland, the Netherlands, Spain, and Portugal, but we're actively trying to acquire assets in new jurisdictions as well. So we also own a property management business called Nido Student, which many people will be familiar with. And over the course of 2022, we also acquired a business in Portugal named Smart Studios.
Thank you very much, Brian. Ricardo, if you would like to go next, please.
Sure. Thank you very much for the invitation. Happy to be here. My name is Ricardo Rodrigues. I'm the business development executive from Reify. Reify is a division from Sonae. We provide all types of technical services regarding development, from licensing to designing, architecture and engineering designs, project and development manager in Portugal, but also throughout Europe. We have offices in Lisbon, Madrid, Milan, Düsseldorf. So a very wide scope. And we've been working actively in student housing, particularly in Iberia. So we have projects in Lisbon, Coimbra, and Porto, as well as in Seville and Madrid. We have actually very recently won a design award by Expresso Imobiliário, so a real estate publication here in Portugal, for a newspaper publication, but focused on real estate on this side, for the interior design of Living in Intercampo, so in Cidade Universitária. So we're very happy to be here to share the insights about how this side of the business can also help contributing the development of the Lisbon market.
Thank you very much, Ricardo. And then finally, last but not least, Lope, if you would care to introduce yourself as well.
Thank you very much, David. Good morning, everyone. I'm Lope Figueroa, Senior Investment Advisor at BONARD. I'm based in Lisbon, and I specialize in investment opportunities in the Iberia region. Very happy to be in this panel. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, all, for the introduction. So let us begin the panel. So as we've noticed an increase in international student population over the recent years, and as well considering this as the main driver and factor for increasing PBSA, considering that there are over 3,700 new PBSAs coming or expected to come in the foreseeable future, I would like to ask them, what do you think has made Lisbon and overall the Portuguese market an attractive location for student housing developments, besides growing international student population and low saturation levels? Perhaps if we can start with Lope.
Yes, thank you, David. Well, PBSA investment in market in Portugal is in a very early stage. So I think it's possible and easier to reach better returns than in C and other geographies. Roughly 1/3 of the total number of students are here in Lisbon. What we have seen in Portugal in the last 5 years has been a market increase in the number of students in higher education, both in Lisbon and in the rest of Portugal. There is a clear link between international students and increasing demand for PBSA. Research tells us that international students are choosing Lisbon and Portugal for its climate, lifestyle, and its affordability, and the continually well-ranked universities which offer world-class top programs in English. These factors, I think, are the catalysts which make this such a good market to invest in PBSA. I don't know what Ricardo and Brian think about that.
Well, listen, let me put it into my own words, which aren't as well studied or scientific as those of Lope. But if anybody's been to Lisbon, Lisbon is a fantastic city. It is one of Europe's best cities to live in. It is actually really good value for money. When you're in the city, you can surf in the morning and party in the evening. It's got some great universities. And so if you're a young person, why would you not want to go and spend some time in Lisbon, either if you're Portuguese or if you're an international student? So the first thing is Lisbon a great place to live? Yes, it is. And it's not the students that see that. What do we forget as we get tied up in the whole PBSA conversation? We always forget we're a subset of the overall residential market. And Lisbon is a booming city. It's been expanding dramatically over the past number of years, with not just students, but with people who are starting businesses. If you're going to start a business in Europe, why would you not start and put your roots down in Lisbon? Seeing a lot of tech startups going there. If anybody goes to the Expo area, it's really special to see, and it's I wouldn't say unrepeated elsewhere in Europe, but it's certainly one of the most buzzing, vibrant, younger cities in Europe, I would say. Post GFC, the sort of liberalisation of the Portuguese property laws has made a big difference on inbound investment and the ability of investors to come to Portugal, which I think has made a huge difference. And the universities have seen this, and they've said, well, this is bonanza time for Portuguese universities. Why would we not seek to be the best we can be and attract the best and brightest students from across the globe? And we've seen the universities in Portugal, even in many cases, offer courses in different languages, with particularly in English. So talking to the universities in Porto and Lisbon, saying, hey, if 3 people on the course want the course to be taught in English, then we teach the course in English, which is also a huge draw, and it's bringing in more international students. And as we know, like I said, the international students have a greater propensity to seek out and require purpose-built student accommodation. So all things considered, a growing city, increasing pressure on housing stock, and an increasing number of students attracts the big international student accommodation investors to the area. So that's certainly the kind of fundamental building blocks for where we begin. And then again, I think a lot of people forget. I think in 20 years' time, we look back on all of the activity we've done in the sector and think, well, of course it worked, because actually what we're doing is we might be a substitute for residential accommodation, but the product we've created and curated around the needs of the student isn't just renting an apartment on the street. And one of the most stark examples of that is the term length. So if you can get a 42-week or 50-week term length, or 42 or 44 or 46 in Lisbon, and you have to rent for 52 weeks in the street, or you walk into student accommodation and your internet is live and working, and you don't have to fight with the Portuguese telecoms organizations and their varying forms to try and get your internet connected and pay your electricity bill and organize your air conditioning, get the repairs done, and sign a contract and pay a high level of deposit for an apartment which might be freezing cold in the winter and boiling hot in the summer. So all ends up, we forget that we've curated a product which is specifically designed for students, and these students who want to move out of home, they are living somewhere in Lisbon and Porto at the moment. We're scooping them out of those areas and putting them in more appropriate accommodation for them with improved density, better sustainability credentials, as it's more modern, and then freeing up housing stock for local residents. So you can see why it's a net positive to have PBSA. From an investor perspective, maybe there are slightly higher yields available in Portugal. That's great. The challenges and headwinds, I'm sure we'll get onto. Maybe the local banks aren't quite as maybe the availability of senior finance isn't quite as deep in Portugal as it might be in other countries in Europe, and that's clearly been worsened by the increasing cost of debt out there as well. So I'll stop quoting now, but hopefully I've sold everybody on Lisbon and Porto. I'd live there in a heartbeat if I didn't have kids in school over here.
Thank you very much, Brian. Ricardo, would you care to comment or to add anything? I believe you are on mute.
So I just reiterate what Brian said. So I think that and I think one of the important part was also the last bit when talking about the investment of the schools of the universities they have made in Portugal in the latest years, with the focus on in increasing their profile within indexes around the world, which made also more students look at Portugal as an attractive place to be. And then when they start looking at Portugal, all that comes with it. So the nice area, the good English that is spoken throughout the country that attracts people and makes them feel more welcoming. And then, well, the sun, the food, etc. So everything that makes people stay around as well. So again, Brian was very, very thorough. So I think that just repeating myself here.
Perfect, thank you. So it's quite interesting to understand a little bit more how the demographics are influencing and sort of creating more attraction and putting Lisbon and Portugal in the eyes of investors as a market that is actually quite lucrative. It's growing, it's very interesting. It's also interesting to have heard that as well, how supply is being driven by demand. So I think these are some of the key points that have been mentioned and extremely interesting as well, I think, for all the people that are going today to sort of understand as well, what is it that makes Lisbon and Portugal quite an interesting market. So if we would talk a little bit more in terms of investor attraction. So we've seen over the recent years, there have been major global events that have influenced both operations and developments. So as well as we've seen shortly after COVID, now we have inflation and we have rising material and energy costs. So I would like to ask, how has this impacted the evolution of PBSA in Portugal? And what were some of the adjustments that you have had to make so to be able to navigate these conditions? Perhaps if we could start with Ricardo.
I was reading one of the questions. Sorry, can you repeat a bit?
Sure. So with current situation now, after major events happening, so post-COVID and now with the rise of inflation and as well material energy costs. So how has this impacted PBSA evolution in Portuguese market? So what have been some of the adjustments that you've had to make to be able to sort of counteract these changes?
Actually, this is very general to real estate development as a whole, and not specific to PBSA. To be honest, this is affecting the whole market. What we've been seeing is, and what makes sense is that, and this is common knowledge, but business plans really need to be tight. So you really need to make up ahead a really tight business plan. Really think about all your nuts and screws, so that you can, when you go to the actual development of the property, there are no questions, there are no uncertainties. You just deliver and be as efficient as possible in the delivery. Secondly, what we're trying to do in terms of making sure that the project is solid is optimizing. So optimizing as much as possible the areas. And that doesn't mean squeezing out the most area possible in terms of rental, because it means making sure that you optimize it in the most attractable way possible for the rooms, for the facility. Because as you saw in your graphic, it is the rooms that have more amenities, that are more friendly to the people that are there, that are going to diversify. So it's not only about maximizing the costs and how you can squeeze the most out of it, but also maximizing the attractability and then the average euro per square meter you can actually extract from it. And secondly, in terms of actually costs, so we also have to look at costs. Value engineering is something that we're looking very much to make sure that the projects get through. Making sure that all of it is carefully analyzed. One of the things we're doing is sometimes upfront getting the materials already, just making sure that you settle the price of the materials to make sure that then you don't have any surprises during the long run of the project.
Perfect. Thank you, Ricardo. Brian, would you care to add?
Yes. Listen, there's a hugely inflationary backdrop of construction costs and labor costs going on across Europe at the moment. And that doesn't show, it's beginning to flatten off in terms of growth, but there's so many major factors going on that we could see that moving around again. In, let's say, best case, the Ukrainian war winds up over the next couple of months. and then all of Europe's steel and concrete is going to go to Ukraine to rebuild that country. So, there are certain headwinds in the construction side as well. So contractors are under a huge amount of pressure to deliver. We typically don't take development risk where we can avoid it. We tend to enter into forward funding or forward purchase arrangements because the local general contractors and the local developers we find are traditionally better served or better placed to take that risk and to price that risk appropriately, more so than a European asset manager like Roundhill. So we have development oversight functions rather than on the ground capabilities. However, we still spend a lot of time, and I'd say it's increased over the past 5 years, the time we spend ensuring that our partners on the ground are sufficiently well capitalized and have robust enough balance sheets and margins to see them through any potential escalation in costs during the construction phase. And of course, in student, it's not just about cost, it's also about deliverability. And we've seen more projects than ever before this year which have been struggling to get over the line and to be open in time for students to move in. And this as probably the most time sensitive asset class that there is in investable real estate. That's hugely important. You do not want to be putting 400 students in hotels for 3 months at the beginning of contract. And indeed, whilst what we need to consistently remind ourselves of as well is that in the UK, for example, I've been doing this nearly 20 years now and forward funding these projects for all that time. And around that strategy is an infrastructure of developers and contractors who are very accustomed to working in this environment where risk is allocated appropriately. That's not necessarily the case in Portugal. So you can stand up a UK style fixed price lump sum development management agreement or development agreement. But it's more nuanced and the locals aren't necessarily as accustomed to dealing in that environment as we are in the UK. So we do spend a lot of time talking to our counterparties to work out exactly where the risk lies and those allocations of risk. It's okay if we can do it ourselves. Portugal has been an example of that in some jobs, but yeah, really it's about the allocation of the risk and indeed pricing in it at a realistic level. So we've had people bring forward opportunities to us, and on scrutiny, we just can't believe that the build costs are achievable. So somebody might be willing to sign a contract to say they'll achieve those build costs, but we're not going to sign a contract unless we have high conviction on the deliverability. So it's a very difficult position at the moment. It would be difficult to do more and more forward funds in Portugal as the sector matures. The rents need to get to a level where you can afford to build it for the rents and afford to make a return for your investor. And that if the backdrop construction inflation, I saw a figure yesterday of 17% annual construction cost inflation, that can't go on for very long, and people continue developing student accommodation in these areas. So we need to keep a very close eye on that. To Ricardo's point, value engineering very carefully, making sure you're not spending money in areas that don't add value, whilst continuing to deliver the products that people expect in terms of space which doesn't directly deliver you a return. So attempting to engineer out some common space and put some more beds in because you make a better return there and your building might stack up more effectively. But that's not where the market is or what people are expecting. They're expecting those common spaces and a private dining room and a space to party or whatever it is that you have in your product mix. So difficult, I would say, and you have to have a laser focus on costs. And organizations like Ricardo's, I'm sure, would be delighted to help anybody who requires help in those areas. And we certainly have worked with them in the past as well. So I'm not sure if that answers any questions other than to say it's complicated, but you have to be all over it.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you. Understood. Great. Times are quite difficult at the moment. So as mentioned, I think a little bit of having more careful planning and taking into consideration costs over the long run is an essential part to be able to guarantee success in the future. So I would like to ask the next question would be how do you think PBSA will influence and change the student accommodation market within Portugal? Perhaps Lope, if you would care to elaborate.
Okay. I have no doubt the supply of student accommodation in Portugal is still very informal and structured. What we need to remember here is that most of the best on offer don't meet the quality of European standards. And here is the opportunity for PBSA. And this is why it will be a disruptor. PBSA by its nature raises standards and offers a better experience. It's almost more likely to meet the needs and expectation of the international students who want more than just a room. They want modern, comfy places to live. It's my view that PBSA put Portugal on the same level as European counterparts. I think that PBSA would close the gap.
Okay, thank you, Lope. Ricardo and Brian, anything you would like to add?
Go on, Ricardo, you can have a go.
Now I was in mute. I do agree with Lope. So the market is still very in early stages. So we still need the challenge here is finding the right place to build. So I think that the biggest challenge in Lisbon is and given the recent realization, as Brian said earlier, in terms of her licensing issues and being able to do so, that was one of the main hurdles that didn't allow the market to grow. There is this the capacity in place, or the possibility in place to do so. Now the challenge is finding the right place to do it. So it's not. Lisbon is growing throughout. So in all areas of real estate, we've been working in offices and residential and PBSA, and everyone is looking for more or less the same areas within the market. So this is one of the challenges of growing PBSA. But for sure, the market is there. For sure, the necessity is there. The fundamentals that you showed earlier in the presentation just make sure that very clear that there's this opportunity. There are some headwinds that might delay it, but sooner or later, the PBSA market will grow, and will grow in all areas of PBSA. I think right now, the first that has been targeted is the higher end type of PBSA. This is the ones that have been developing, and that's we've been involved as well in the latest years. I think that we'll also try to the market will also target all the areas, all the value chain of PBSA as well.
I think that's right. I think I've been, for better or for worse, involved in moving the product into a few different markets around the world, and whether that be Madrid, which had more Colegio Mayores, we're trying to introduce PBSA, or Operation Seville. We were some of the first people to go into even Ireland, which was not the UK in terms of maturity back in 2016. And I guess my observation is that it does take a little while, especially in Southern Europe, for culturally people to understand what the product is that we're delivering. And 20 years ago, I suppose I was involved in delivering the first ones in the UK, some of the first ones in the UK, and for about a year, people walk past it and go, "What is that? Is it a bottle of apartments? Is it an art gallery? Is it whatever?" And we found exactly that in Lisbon as we've been developing. There was a very long period where students just walked past and said, "Oh, that's very interesting. But what is it?" And this is NASA around the corner from the University of Lisbon. And it took time, and it took people to reserve the rooms, and people are intelligent, students are intelligent, but if this is their first time, you only get to be 18 once. And you don't want to make mistakes, and you don't want to be the guy who's reserved a room in a really crazy, made a crazy decision. This brand new product, people have this nervousness of being at the bleeding edge, you would say in English rather than the cutting edge of technology. And in some places, student accommodation feels like that. So the more student accommodation there is, the more people have the chance to see it, to walk past it every day, to have friends who've lived there, to get those sort of word of mouth experiences, and to kind of realize, like, you kind of start off going to the University of Lisbon. Your brother was 6 years older, and he went there and he rented an apartment somewhere in the outskirts and spent 45 minutes commuting to university every day. And then you come home one day and say, well, there's this new building. It feels more expensive, but actually when I consider it's got a gym and it's got private areas, public areas, it's got community, it's all inclusive utilities, it's got air conditioning. So all, pound or euro for euro, it's probably around the same price. And I walked to university from there. But culturally, he's ready to move into the apartment on the outskirts of Lisbon. And it takes time for that cultural adaptation to take place. And that's why being the pioneers in a new market can be challenging and can be something of a scary journey whilst you get that first year's occupancy in place. And coupled with the fact that here in Lisbon, there's a huge, certainly our observations in Portugal, similarly to Spain, is that the huge involvement of the parents in the buying decision, the huge level of additional customer service that's required. We've got a great manager in Newcastle. The students refer to us as mother, and that's not something you would experience in the UK or in Northern Europe. But it goes, and the buying decision takes maybe 2 or 3 visits on occasion, rather than again in Northern Europe where people might just reserve a room online, not having seen it before. So it's been a very we're building an industry, building a sector, building something completely new in this market, which for better or for worse, I've experienced on a few different occasions, and we're seeing the same dynamics in Lisbon exactly. Now, in the normal run of things, the supply demand being so strong, were the development markets in good shape, then I would expect to see a very significant growth in the number of beds in Lisbon, because now the thesis has been proven. It's a very big step for investors to go from thesis to spade in the ground. But now there are a significant number of beds in Lisbon and some experienced operators who are running those beds, and all the beds in Lisbon are pretty much fully occupied. In Nido, in Lisbon, we're seeing about 65% international students, which is a good ratio, but also heartening to see that those 35% of Portuguese students are happy to pay the rents that we're commanding. All those things are going to change going into next year, of course, and then the revised rents and what inflation does to rents still remains to be seen. But were development costs to normalize, I would expect to see a lot more developers looking at Lisbon. I think the other slight nuance that we have in Portugal that we can't skate around is that to open a new country for an investor, operator, asset manager, developer is a significant burden from a cost perspective on the way in. So where the fact we've got over 2,000 beds in Portugal, that allows us the sort of critical mass to make that a thesis. People are not too keen on opening one building in Lisbon and having 5-10 buildings in Spain and one in Lisbon. That feels like a bit of a complication. So I think that factor, it might be a limiting factor. So that plus the escalating cost of development might slow down some of the some future projects being brought forwards. But the supply demand dynamic is so strong that I feel more and more people will do it. And that dynamic for me is only going to strengthen. Now people understand what the asset class is and have friends living in it. And every 400 students that move out of Nido and have many out of smart studios every year will tell their friends about the experience. Our Nido Lisbon students, just looking at the stat this morning, are over 85% likely to rebook or recommend friends to stay in Nido. And the NPS score, which the industry average is 15, ours in Portugal is 26. So we have, that's okay. It's because we do a great job and smart studios do a great job, and we're the best, But it's also, we're introducing a new product which is more tailored and suited to students than anything they've seen before in Portugal. So I think all ends up super positive, but those development costs, given that if you want to have student accommodation in Portugal, you kind of have to develop because there isn't much standing stock to buy. If those development stocks keep going up, development costs keep going up way in excess of the amount rents go up, and the cost of debt goes up. They are significant headwinds to weather in Portugal.
True, but even with those headwinds, what I can share with you guys is that we have had a lot more interested lately on development projects of PBSA than we had before. So the interest is there. So people, even facing the harsh reality that we're currently facing, they still look at Lisbon and they still want to be present in the market and start looking at opportunities there, international and national developers.
Yep, and so they should.
Perfect. Thank you. So as we can see that there are indeed many different conditions that are actually influencing the change of student accommodation within Portugal. So Lope, I would like to bring it back to you, since as well as you mentioned some of the conditions that are specific to the market. What do you think developers and operators need to do to ensure that the services and that the needs of the students are met considering PBSA opposed to other options?
Well, as Brian has said, we have two different markets. We have the domestic students, Portuguese students, and internationals. Obviously, the domestic market is far more price sensitive, and it's something that I think that they should consider. At the moment that we are now, the purchasing power of international students are the ones who are basically available to occupy the most of the PBSA, as Brian was saying, is 65%. But I think that with more PBSA on offer and with price stabilizations, this will change in time. When choosing a PBSA, research tells us that international students are demanding modern, high-quality facilities as a minimum, but expects all-inclusive rentals. And interestingly, professionalism. That is something that the PBSA is doing. I believe that Portugal offer a real opportunity for PBSA operators, but to secure the growth, we have to pay attention to customers and their needs, which are implicitly demanding.
All right, thank you very much, Lope. Thank you very much, Brian and Ricardo. Indeed, quite a lot of developments, quite a lot of things to take into consideration for PBSA within Portugal. So I would like to go to the next question. So considering basically everything that we've said so far, everything that's been discussed, so what overall would you expect regarding investments and developments in the city for the next couple of years? Do you think that there will be more developments coming, or perhaps new investors coming? Will they be focusing on certain cities, or what would be overall your take and your interpretation?
As I said, I think that the interest is still there. So if it's going to happen in 2023, or if it's going to happen in 2024, given that, as I said, the headwinds, I'm not able to specifically tell you, but for sure, there are more investors looking at it in terms of development projects, and they are looking at Lisbon very intensely. Lisbon has this challenges in terms of finding the right product to make sure that it gets it. But for sure, the interest is there. So we have, as Brian will probably tell, Brian has a significant pipeline of projects coming up in the last years. I think they're looking at it with the prospect that the market is there. It's just a matter of making sure that the financials make work, because for sure that the demand is there. Just to reiterate, all the projects that we're working on are also more than 90% occupied. So, and they're not the problem is not finding the people to get in the projects is making sure that we get the right product for them. So I think that's the big summary of that.
Thank you very much, Ricardo. Brian?
Well, I think it's quite clear to everybody on the call, they should just leave Portugal, to those of us who are experts in Portugal, and just go and find somewhere else to invest. That's probably the best message I can give to people.
Thank you, Brian. Lope?
Nothing. I have nothing to say. Nothing better than Ricardo and Brian expertise.
Perfect. Okay. Well, considering everything that is mentioned, I think we can then conclude that Lisbon and the Portugal market are quite interesting. They're growing. There have been some obstacles, as we've mentioned. However, with careful attention and planning as well, we are going to be able to tackle all these certain obstacles. We see that indeed PBSA is growing. It is a very resilient and counter-cyclical asset class that has proven this over the past couple of years, especially due to all the crises and similar. And we can also definitely see that there are many adjustments going on, each one as well influenced by whether it be cultural aspects, it will be local aspects, it will be by the types of students that attend and similar. So I would like to then consider that this was a very interesting session. I would like to firstly thank our dear panelists, very interesting insights, very valuable information for us as well, wanting to know a little bit more about the developments, to understand a little bit more the Portuguese market, specifically the Lisbon one, to see how it's grown over the past couple of years, how it has been evolving, and how it will continue to do so over the next periods of time. So thank you very much once again to Brian, Ricardo, and Lope. It was very interesting to hear from your point of view, especially since you have quite a lot of involvement within this market. And well, you basically are the experts as well that were able to provide your viewpoints and as well to help us understand a little bit more. So I would like to thank you on behalf of BONARD as well, and on behalf of all of our attendees to the webinar. And I would like to as well thank you very much all the participants for their time. We understand as well that times are currently quite busy, but we always are very happy to provide you with as well all the information, with all the data and our research that could help support your decisions so that you can leverage them as well when it comes to having more types of conversations and similar. So I would like to as well thank all of the team for their effort into preparing all of our content and the ongoing work that is being put in. So I could be able to say that we have successfully concluded this webinar. And just to briefly mention as well, there will be an upcoming one on Paris. And then regarding the date, we will let you know in due time. And as well concerning the deck and recording, it shall be made available and sent to all of you automatically when everything is put together. So thank you very much, everyone, for attending. It was our pleasure. Thank you as well, once again, to our guest speakers for their time and for their valuable insights. So I would like to wish all of you a lovely day and a week ahead, and hope to speak soon. Thank you very much.